let's learn the difference between the direct utility function and indirect utility function. Okay, we say this, let us say we have a utility function like this. Utility is a function of two goods that the consumer chooses, that is good X and good Y, which is equal to X times Y. This is the utility function, what we call the direct utility function of a consumer. Here you can see that the utility depends, or utility directly depends upon the quantities of good X and Y that the consumer chooses. Okay, now when we solve this direct utility function, that means we want to maximize the utility subject to the budget constraint. So maximize this utility function subject to the budget constraint. What can be the budget constraint? That will be the price of X times units of good X that the consumer consumes, plus price of good Y times units of good Y, should be equal to the income of the consumer, where M denotes the total income of the consumer. So when we solve the direct utility function, okay, that means maximize the utility function subject to this budget constraint. For that we use the tangency condition, obviously. That is, we equate the MRS with the ratio of the prices. MRS denotes the slope of the indifference curve. Okay, so with the given budget, which is denoted by the red line, consumer wants to reach to the highest possible indifference curve to maximize his satisfaction from consuming good X and Y. And the optimal bundle will be at a point where the indifference curve, that is IC2, is tangent to the budget line. And it is a point where, this is a point where MRS is equal to the ratio of the prices, price of X upon price of Y. MRS simply denotes the slope of the indifference curve, and PX upon PY denotes the slope of the budget line. So what is MRS? It is simply the ratio of the marginal utility of good X and Y, and it should be equal to price of X and price of Y. Okay, when we solve this, MUX is the partial derivative of utility function with respect to good X. So partially differentiating this function with respect to X, derivative of Y is 1, so we are left with, derivative of X is 1, so we are left with Y. And similarly, MUY means the derivative of the utility function with respect to Y, derivative of Y is 1, so we are left with good X. Now when we equate, rather, MUX upon MUY with the ratio of the prices, that is Y upon X is equal to price of X upon price of Y. And when we solve it for Y and then plug the value of Y into the budget constraint, okay, so Y is this very stuff. When I plug the value of this into the budget constraint, that is price of X times X, this term, plus price of Y times the value of Y is this very stuff. This Y is price of X upon price of Y times X, should be equal to the income of the consumer, which implies this PY gets cancelled. So PX times X plus PX times X is twice PX times X, should be equal to M. And when we solve this for X, so we will get this X is equal to M upon 2PX. So what is this actually? This is the Marshall demand function. When the demand of a good depends upon the income and the prices, we call that the Marshall demand function or ordinary demand function. Okay, and similarly, when we plug the value of X is equal to this stuff into this equation, we will get the Marshall demand for good Y. Okay, the thing that I want to make it here clear, direct utility function depends upon the goods that the consumer consumes. What about indirect utility function? Now we know that here the optimal quantities are in fact, determined by the income and the prices. You can see here also, quantities of good X demanded by the consumer depends upon the income and the prices. And when we plug these Marshall and demand functions into our direct utility function and solve them, so when I plug the value of X and Y in this equation, I will get, in place of X I have M upon 2PX, in place of Y I have M upon 2PY. When I solve this, I will get M square upon 2PX times PY. This is what we call the indirect utility function. Why it is called indirect utility function? Here you can see, since income and prices determine the quantities purchased, and quantities determine the utility. That means that utility indirectly depends upon the money and prices. Okay, very simple thing. So we know that, let us say, income and prices, they determine the quantities of good X and Y, and these quantities of good X and Y in fact determine our utility. Okay, that simply means that utility indirectly depends upon the income and the prices. That is what we call the indirect utility function. I hope I make myself clear in this video. Thank you.